The 4th of July, 1857, Savannah, Georgia, in KO. While white families gathered around town squares watching fireworks celebrate American freedom, a skilled blacksmith named Miriam was planning to claim her own liberation with a pistol she'd secretly forged in the dead of night. As red, white, and blue explosions lit up the Georgia sky, another kind of thunder would echo through Savannah's streets, one that would make her master's blood run cold. But what drives a woman who's lost everything to choose certain death over another day in chains? The scent of magnolia blossoms mingles with gunpowder smoke as America celebrates 81 years of independence. But for Miriam, this Independence Day will mark the beginning of her own revolution. The blacksmith's calloused hands grip her hammer with the same steady rhythm they've maintained for 2 decades, each strike against the anvil, a heartbeat counting down to freedom. Born into bondage on the sprawling Thornfield plantation, she has learned to mask her keen intelligence behind carefully lowered eyes and measured silence, understanding that a thinking slave is a dangerous slave in the minds of her oppressors. Master Jeremiah Thornfield moves through his world like a king surveying his domain, his polished boots clicking against marble floors while Miriam's bare feet know only the rough-hewn boards of the slave quarters. The contrast cuts deeper than any physical wound. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across Thornfield's dining room, where silver gleams and imported wine flows freely, while 20 yards away, oil lamps struggle to pierce the darkness of cramped cabins where families huddle together on straw mattresses. The master feasts on roasted beef and honey-glazed ham, savoring each bite with the satisfaction of absolute power, while Miriam survives on cornmeal mush and scraps thrown from the big house kitchen like offerings to livestock. Thornfield's voice carries the authority of generations, backed by law, custom, and the ever-present threat of violence. He quotes scripture to justify his cruelty, twisting holy words into chains stronger than iron. Beside him stands Samuel Crowley, the overseer whose weathered face bears the permanent sneer of a man who has found purpose in breaking spirits. Crowley's whip hangs from his belt like a serpent ready to strike, and his eyes constantly search for infractions, real or imagined. Together, they represent more than individual evil. They are the living embodiment of a system designed to crush human dignity beneath the weight of profit and prejudice. The July heat presses down like a suffocating blanket, but inside the plantation's whitewashed walls, servants fan their masters with palmetto leaves, while ice imported from distant northern lakes chills their mint juleps. Outside, field hands collapse from heat exhaustion, their suffering dismissed as laziness by men who have never known a day of honest labor. As twilight approaches and the first fireworks begin to bloom across Savannah's skyline, Miriam wipes sweat from her brow and gazes through her workshop window at the celebration of freedom she has never known. The explosions of red, white, and blue paint the heavens with the colors of liberty, but cast long shadows across those still bound in servitude. Tonight, as white families gather to commemorate their ancestors' rebellion against tyranny, one woman prepares to write her own Declaration of Independence in blood and gunpowder. The transformation begins on a morning when summer heat shimmers like tears across the cotton fields, and Thornfield's voice cuts through the humid air with devastating finality. "Sold her to the Beaumont place up in Charleston," he announces with casual indifference, as if discussing the sale of livestock rather than the destruction of a human heart. Sarah, Miriam's wife of 3 years, heavy with their first child, stands frozen in disbelief before the reality crashes over her like a tide of despair. Her screams pierce the morning stillness as rough hands drag her toward the waiting wagon, her fingers clawing desperately at the earth that will no longer be her home. "Your property, boy!" Thornfield sneers at Miriam, whose entire world crumbles in the span of heartbeats. "Don't you forget it." The wagon wheels creak and groan as they carry away everything that made life bearable, leaving behind only the echo of Sarah's anguished cries and the cruel laughter of men who trade in human misery. Thornfield emerges from this moment, not merely as a master, but as something far more sinister, a man who views human beings as commodities, to be bought, sold, and discarded at will. His cruelty runs deeper than mere economics. There's a calculated pleasure in his destruction of slave families, a deliberate savagery that uses the Bible as justification for acts that would make demons recoil. He speaks of divine will while tearing children from their mother's arms, quotes passages about servants obeying their masters while his own hands remain soft and unmarked by honest labor. Crowley stands as his willing executioner, a man who has elevated brutality to an art form, finding creative ways to inflict maximum suffering while keeping his human property functional enough to generate profit. His whip doesn't just punish, it educates, teaching lessons written in scars across countless backs about the price of hope and the futility of dreams. The system they represent extends far beyond the plantation's borders, reaching into every courthouse, every church, every heart that has accepted the fundamental lie that some humans are worth less than others. Every sheriff who returns runaway slaves, every judge who upholds property rights over human rights, every citizen who turns a blind eye to suffering becomes complicit in this machinery of oppression that grinds souls to dust beneath wheels greased with tears and blood. But something fundamental shifts in Miriam's soul as Sarah's cries fade into memory. The grief that threatened to consume him crystallizes into something harder and more dangerous: cold, calculating determination. He stops lifting his voice in evening prayers, stops believing that deliverance will come from heaven when it can be forged with his own hands. The blacksmith's hammer takes on new meaning as he works, each strike against glowing metal now a rehearsal for revolution. Independence Day approaches like destiny, and gunpowder will soon fill the air, some celebratory, some revolutionary, all of it carrying the promise of freedom for those brave enough to seize it. The pistol takes shape in the pre-dawn darkness of her workshop, forged from scraps of iron and 20 years of suppressed rage. Each careful tap of Miriam's hammer whispers secrets into the metal memories of Sarah's gentle laughter, the weight of unborn dreams, the taste of freedom that has lived only in her imagination. Her calloused fingers work with surgical precision, crafting not just a weapon, but an instrument of destiny, while her mind rehearses the moment that will transform her from property into legend. The smell of coal smoke and hot metal fills her nostrils as she thinks, "They stole my husband, my child, my very soul tonight. I reclaim what was never theirs to take." Independence Day dawns with oppressive heat and the promise of celebration. Savannah's elite gather in the town square as twilight approaches, their silk gowns and pressed suits a stark contrast to the rough homespun of those who serve them. Children chase fireflies while their parents raise toasts to liberty with glasses that will never touch enslaved lips. The first rockets streak skyward, painting the heavens in brilliant reds and blues, their thunderous explosions drowning out the whispered prayers of those who know freedom only as a distant dream. Miriam moves through the crowd like a ghost, her hidden weapon pressing against her ribs with each heartbeat, her eyes scanning the gathering until they find their target. Thornfield stands beneath a massive oak tree, his corpulent frame draped in expensive fabric, a crystal tumbler of bourbon catching the firelight as he regales his companions with tales of his latest business ventures, human lives reduced to profit margins in his casual conversation. The irony cuts like a blade, a man celebrating freedom while denying it to others, toasting independence while holding human souls in bondage. Miriam approaches with measured steps, her face a mask of decades practiced submission, but her heart pounds with the rhythm of revolution. The crowd presses closer to watch a particularly spectacular display of pyrotechnics, their gasps and applause providing perfect cover for what comes next. "Master Thornfield," Miriam says quietly, her voice carrying across the short distance between slavery and justice, "do you remember Sarah?" The question hangs in the sulfur-scented air, like an accusation from heaven itself. Recognition flickers in the master's eyes, first confusion, then dawning horror as he realizes that his property has become his executioner. The pistol emerges from Miriam's clothes with fluid grace, its barrel catching starlight as another firework explodes overhead. Time stretches like molten metal as Thornfield's mouth opens in a scream that will never escape his throat. The shot rings out precisely, as rockets burst in brilliant cascades above, the two sounds blending into one perfect moment of cosmic justice. Thornfield crumples to the earth he once ruled, his blood seeping into soil that has drunk the tears of countless enslaved souls, while red, white, and blue lights dance across his lifeless eyes, like mockery of the freedom he denied to others. Miriam stands over her former master, finally free, her head held high for the first time in 20 years of bondage. The crowd freezes as understanding ripples through their ranks like wildfire. Conversations die mid-sentence, children stop their games, and the only sounds are the distant boom of fireworks and the whisper of smoke curling from Miriam's pistol. She makes no attempt to flee, no desperate scramble for the shadows that might offer temporary sanctuary. Instead, she remains statue still beside Thornfield's body, her weapon hanging loose in her hand, her eyes fixed on some distant horizon where freedom and justice converge. When the sheriff and his deputies finally break through their shock and surge forward with drawn guns and shouted commands, Miriam sets down her pistol with the same careful precision she once used to shoe horses and forge chains. Her surrender carries more dignity than any master's boast, more authority than any overseer's whip. The trial becomes theater of the absurd, where men who buy and sell human beings sit in judgment of one who dared to claim her humanity through violence. Judge Harrison Blackwood presides with wig and robes that cannot disguise the moral bankruptcy of his court, while prosecutors paint Miriam as a savage beast who bit the hand that fed her. But something extraordinary happens in that stifling courtroom. Miriam's quiet dignity transforms the proceedings into a mirror that reflects the true savagery of slavery itself. She answers questions with intelligence that belies every stereotype, speaks with eloquence that shames her supposed betters, and faces her certain death with courage that exposes the cowardice of those who profit from human misery. The verdict surprises no one, but the woman who receives it transcends every expectation. Word of Miriam's act spreads like underground fire through slave quarters across Georgia and beyond. Field hands whisper her name while picking cotton. Kitchen servants speak of her while preparing meals for masters who grow increasingly nervous. And mothers tell their children stories of the blacksmith who forged her freedom from iron and courage. Northern abolitionists seize upon her tale as proof of slavery's inherent violence, while Southern newspapers denounce her as evidence of the need for stricter controls. But in the secret places where enslaved people gather in churches, in quarters, in the hidden spaces of the heart, her name becomes synonymous with the unquenchable human desire for liberty. Letters carry her story beyond Georgia's borders. Newspaper accounts spread her legend across a divided nation, and oral traditions ensure that her memory will outlive the chains that bound her. Frederick Douglass writes of her in his speeches. Harriet Tubman invokes her courage when leading souls to freedom, and countless nameless heroes find strength in her example. Years later, as America tears itself apart in civil war, soldiers on both sides will know the name of the blacksmith who chose death over bondage, who proved that the human spirit cannot be permanently chained by any earthly power. The fireworks of that July night faded into memory, but Miriam's legacy burns eternal, a reminder that sometimes freedom must be seized rather than granted, and that true independence comes not from documents or declarations, but from the courage to say no more when facing insurmountable odds.